I am of the firm belief that The Puppet Master is one of the most underrated episodes in Avatar, which you might think is crazy to say because it is still rated at a 9.1 on IMDb, and it is the 16th highest rated episode in the entire show, but I don't think I could name confidently 10 episodes that are better than this one. There are two things that make The Puppet Master so great, the first one being Katara, who we get to see just being Katara as she goes through something really traumatic, and that's obviously very impactful to the audience as it humanizes Katara even more, and she was already one of the most realistic and relatable and well-written characters in the entire show. But as great as Katara is, there is, like I said, one more thing that makes this episode so great, which is Hama, who is one of the best one-off characters that we see in the entire show. Now, I know what you might be thinking. So the two things that make the episode great are the two main characters, bro? Isn't that kind of obvious? Yes, that's what I said. But it's true because Avatar, spoiler alert, has great character writing. I know, I just blew your mind. No, I'm just kidding, because it's actually really obvious. That was the joke, so I didn't really, because everybody knows Avatar. Okay, anyway, now let me tell you about Hama. Hama is, at first, an innocent old lady living in the Fire Nation until we learn that she is actually the Puppet Master, the second living waterbender from the Southern Air Temple. That's not right. The Southern Water Tribe, or I guess she's technically the first because she's older, and Katara came second, so really, Katara is the second. Okay, that doesn't matter. After the Fire Nation tried to wipe out all of the waterbenders in the Southern Water Tribe, Hama was captured, and while imprisoned, she created bloodbending, which is definitely the most messed up, morally corrupt, or morally devoid, the most immoral type of specialized sub-skill bending. And the whole episode is really just a build-up to the reveal of bloodbending when Katara and Hama fight, and Katara picks up on bloodbending and does it, and Hama's like, I don't care that I'm going to prison, at least my bending art form thing that I created survived. So really, it's just a great episode about morality and trauma and, you know, how far are you willing to go? What are you willing to do? And Hama herself is so well characterized. She's such a great concept for a character, you know, this person that's living in the Fire Nation, but is actually a waterbender and a Southern waterbender, which we didn't even think there were any more of those. Like, Katara and Sokka's reaction was literally me the first time I watched this.
It's the last thing I owned from growing up in the Southern Water Tribe.
So basically, she is a great side character. But now let's get into how Hama broke waterbending. Because if she was a little smarter, she could have taken on the Fire Nation by herself. She was kind of already on the way to doing that, but she was just wasting her time on a bunch of nobodies instead of going for the actual menaces of the Fire Nation. But how exactly did Hama break waterbending? Let's start with the basics, not even talking about bloodbending yet. She shows us that waterbenders have the power to take water straight out of plants or even out of thin air, which makes sense because of, you know, humidity. And theoretically, this means that she didn't even need bloodbending to break out of the Fire Nation prison because she could have just pulled enough water out of the air. And maybe it's just a case of like humidity, like she was only able to pull water out of air in front of Katara because they were in, you know, this humid, well, I don't know if it was humid, but they were outside, you know, it was probably more humid. And in that prison, maybe there wasn't that much water in the air. But either way, even if she couldn't have broken out just by pulling water out of thin air, that concept alone, that ability to get water from the air is pretty broken. And I feel like I don't really need to explain why, but I mean, I'm making this video for a reason, so. The biggest reason why this is broken is because it removes the biggest limitation of waterbending, which is that you need water. And this basically says, you know, if you think about it, there's water everywhere, so you always have a source. And it's obviously not ideal because it looks like Hama needed to take a second just to get that little bit of water out of the air, but this is obviously still better than nothing, and it means that outside of combat, waterbenders just have an infinite water source. And I'm not talking Minecraft, but they could use that for anything that they need, for drinking, for whatever, you know? But also just think about the possibilities in like a super humid place. Like, bro, imagine a waterbender in Florida, bro. They would be unstoppable. It'd basically just be like it's like they're just constantly in a pool. They just have that much water around them, dude. That would be overpowered. They would be able to bend water out of the air like a firebender creates fire, dude. Like it would literally be like that. But anyway, on that note, you might bring up that, you know, firebenders, airbenders, earthbenders all have a more accessible source of their element because, you know, firebenders and airbenders, obviously they just created themselves. Earthbenders, pretty much always gonna have some earth around you to use, right? Unless you're deliberately like in an anti-earthbender place like Toph was. But even then, she figured out how to escape. But anyways, I think that what waterbenders lack in accessibility to their element, they make up for in the versatility of their element. Because water, you can just do so many things with water. And you can do so many things with like earth as well. But I think water is just the most like all around. You can do so much stuff with water. You can heal with it. You can make weapons out of it. You can obviously just hit people with water. You can do the ice. You can make ice. You can do so much stuff. So it kind of has to be the least readily available element. But now that Hama can modernized pulling it out of the air, it's actually now one of the more accessible elements other than firebending and airbending because they just create it. But now waterbenders can essentially do the same thing just to a lesser extent. But you might be thinking, he's kind of reaching a little bit. They can't really pull that much water out of the air. And what I have to say to that is, if there was like a dedicated waterbender who was just wanted to strictly learn how to pull it out of the air, I feel like they could do a lot more than what Hama did, and in a quicker amount of time, because it's a very niche kind of bending to just pull it out of the air. But now that it's possible, an earthbender or a waterbender, I mean, could just be like, I'm gonna figure out how to do this so I can just get water anywhere. And we've seen that kind of advancement in bending in bloodbending, because in Korra, bloodbending becomes much easier apparently because now you can do it without a full moon. And low-key, Korra ruined bloodbending out of many other things it ruined, but I'm just saying, you know, maybe someone could figure the same thing out with pulling water out of thin air. And maybe even if you couldn't learn to take huge amounts of water out of the air quickly, maybe an earthbender, I mean a waterbender, why do I keep saying earthbender? Maybe a waterbender could learn to just manipulate the air around someone, the water in the air around someone, and like freeze the water in the air around someone, and then maybe that would slow them down or something. I don't know if you could like completely freeze them, but you know what I'm saying. Anyway, that's just something to think about. There are so many possibilities with pulling water out of thin air, just so many like implications, I guess. But the big thing about this episode, as we all know, is bloodbending, which is much more indicative of how Hama actually broke waterbending. Because even before bloodbending got buffed like crazy and anybody could do it now apparently, it was still overpowered even when you could only do it on the full moon. Because if Hama was smart enough, which I think she was, she just didn't have her priorities straight, she could have tried to get an in with the Fire Nation royalty, something like that, try to get in the castle or whatever the Fire Nation stays in, I don't know, the palace, that's what it's called, the palace. Tried to get in the palace, and then on the full moon, bloodbend the Fire Lord and just take him out, and then boom, Hama, you just ended the war. Except maybe Ozai, maybe he can defend against bloodbending, but I don't exactly know how that works. That was never clarified, because Katara is a waterbender. Oh, you don't say. But is that why she was able to break free of Hama's bloodbending? Or is it because she just had a strong enough will and was a strong enough bender? Like, could any bender have done what Katara did, or do you have to be a waterbender? I feel like you would have to be a waterbender. I mean, Katara did say, like, my bending is stronger than yours, so you're powerless against me, or your technique doesn't work against me. And surely by that she meant her waterbending is stronger than Hama's waterbending, not just her bending in general, and they just happen to both be waterbenders, right? Do you know what I'm saying? This is kind of confusing, but do you get it? Anyway, that's not even the point. Point is that waterbenders are OP because of bloodbending. I know it only happens once a month for them, at least in the time of Avatar, but think about it this way. Waterbenders get their own Sozin's Comet every single month through the full moon. I think that's honestly a fair comparison because bloodbending is just that powerful. I mean, I guess in terms of like actual destructive force, waterbenders obviously aren't as powerful as like Ozai spitting flames during Sozin's Comet, but in terms of their power against opponents, it's like even better than Sozin's Comet. And by that I just mean a waterbender with a full moon is more dangerous than a firebender during Sozin's Comet, at least in combat. Because think about it, would you rather face a bloodbender or a comet enhanced firebender? Because the bloodbender, you're just done. Your only hope is that you're a stronger waterbender than them. And if you're not a waterbender, you might just be cooked. But against a comet enhanced firebender, this is assuming that you're also, you know, like a bender, but I think you stand a better chance because the bloodbender is just an instant loss. And it's worth bringing up that a bloodbender on the full moon would still beat a comet enhanced firebender just like by default because of the power of bloodbending. But maybe I am overestimating how easy it is to bloodbend. But then again, Katara did do it without any training, so. But anyway, what do you think? Am I overrating bloodbending, or is it actually totally busted and Hama kind of broke the whole Avatar universe in terms of the power of waterbending? Let me know what you think, and thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please consider dropping a like and also a sub, potentially. And with that being said, until next time.